Okay.
Blank lang.
So we have analysis of forces. Now we're able to see. Okay, this is now recorded presentation. Okay, we have analysis of forces. Can you see my presentation, my slide?
Yes, sir.
Uban.
Yes, sir.
Okay na.
Naana.
So we have analysis of forces, no? And we have what we call a system of forces. When can we say that there is a system of forces? What do you think? When there are two or more forces, no, acting on a body, no, then we can consider that to be a system of forces. Okay? Sa duna kunoy pila, two or more forces, no, acting in a body, then we consider that a system of forces. Now, these forces can be grouped into two. No? So, we have two general classification of which. So, we have the coplanar and non-coplanar forces. What do you think by coplanar? If they are forces that is acting on one plane. Non-coplanar, if you have two different planes at which the forces will be acting. No? So, suppose you have an intersecting walls and a floor, no? So they are considered to be different planes, no? If the forces will be acting on the floor alone, then that is coplanar, no? Pero if there will be forces that will act on the walls, the floor, so that is non-coplanar, no? So coplanar forces are forces acting on the same plane, while the non-coplanar forces are acting on different planes. So if we will be having the non-coplanar, so we also have a reference axis like X, Y, Z axis, no? And coplanar usually is itong magita X and Y axis, right? Okay, so these force system are also grouped according to their pattern of application. When the forces will intersect at the common point, how do we classify them? Anybody? They are forces classified as concurrent force system. So if there is a concurrent force system, there are also forces which will never intersect. Okay, so we call them as parallel forces. And the third is a non-concurrent forces or a general force system. Okay? So next slide. What is a concurrent force system? Again, they are forces that will intersect at a common point. Okay? So resultant of a concurrent force system. So what is a resultant? When the system of forces is reduced into a single force having the same effect as the system, that force is what is termed as the resultant. So when the forces are balanced, now the resultant will be equal to 0. Okay, we have methods of solving the resultant. We can have the analytical method or simply the use of components. Okay? So like this, we have a formula to apply. Okay? So actually, this is very similar to what we solved previously. If you know how to solve for the summation of forces along X, summation of forces along Y, so the summation of forces along X and Y will actually serve as the components of your resultant. So, your R can also be the square root. Actually, we are following here the Pythagorean theorem. Okay? Now, for the direction of the resultant, the direction is defined by the angle theta. Okay, we have a formula that can be used. But if you notice, the angle here is termed as bar theta because the angle that you can solve when you take the arctan of the absolute value of the ratio of the summation of forces along Y over the summation of forces along X is what is termed as the reference angle. The value of theta or kining imuhang gitawag o direction of your resultant can be obtained by just taking the geometry of the figure, no? Okay, how to get or to analyze the geometry of the figure. Okay, so ngayon. So the geometry of the figure will be considered to find the value of theta as an angle in standard position. What do you mean by angle in standard position in our trigonometry? So you must consider the positive x-axis as your initial side, and you can rotate in either clockwise or counterclockwise direction to the line of action of your resultant. For the sign convention, counterclockwise angle is positive and clockwise angle is usually taken as negative. So this is in relation to analytical method, no? But there is also another method where we will be using graphs, no? And one of which is the use of the what method? It is actually the use of the parallelogram law. Okay, so we have the parallelogram law, the law of triangles, and the force polygon method. Parallelogram law, this is applicable when we have a system of two forces. Law of triangle, just the same. This is containing two forces, system which involve two forces. So again, this can be involving two or more. No? So you have the force polygon method. In the graphical method, okay, so this is how to follow this kind of solution. In the first polygon method, so this is applicable to system with two or more forces involved. So using a measuring instrument, you have to plot the first chosen force with its tail at the origin in a position as given. Then form the head, then from the head, of the first, connect the tail of the second until you arrive with the last force. The resultant is the closing line of the polygon. It is measured from the tail of the first connected to the head of the last force with its head. Okay, now, the parallelogram law and the sign law, as I've said, so is a method, a graphical method that is applicable to two-force system. So suppose you have a figure like this, no? If ang ato karon nga force 1, may atong gamiton as our initial force. So allow this to be located exactly at the origin, dire. Then connect the next force from its head. Now you connect the tail of the second, then and so on until you arrive with the last force. Now, if the force the last force, does not go back at the initial position, so meaning there is a value of the resultant is kidding. So if you have to take the measure of this, this will represent the magnitude and the direction can also be identified. Okay? So specific example will follow. Okay, from the resultant, for the resultant of the given system, you are asked to find the magnitude and direction measured from the positive x-axis. That would mean that the angle must be in standard position. Okay? So actually, this is a very common example in physics. No? Okay, given. So this involves two forces. We have direction of the first force from the x-axis, and we have a direction from the y-axis of the second force. No? By the way, if this is termed as reference angle, reference angle is an angle, a positive angle measured from x. No? So it is a positive angle to the line of action of the force. But if the measure of the angle is taken from y, no? So kini siya muna itong tawgon o co-reference angle, which means complementary to the reference angle. Kini, what is the reference angle of 200 if you are asked to determine? It is actually 90
Wait,
minus the
please.
co-reference angle. So if this is the reference angle 14, the co-reference angle is a measure, the angular measure from y to the line of action of the force. Okay? So if we have to start with the analytical method in solving for the resultant, so this is how to do that. You have to solve for the summation of forces along y and summation of forces along x. Okay, saying for the summation of forces along x, 250, kini. The line or ang imo karong sense of your force to 50 is directed towards the right direction in an upward manner. Okay? So, ang imo component ari rimagi if we are taking forces along x. So, for the component of this, that is along x and that is adjacent to 14. So, to directly obtain the component, horizontal component of that, So it is the magnitude of the force multiplied with the cosine of 14, no? Because it is adjacent to the angle 14. Well, here, if we have to take the horizontal component of 200, it would also be here, correct? And that force, according to parallelogram law, pwede sa nako mabutang dili, right? Okay, so if I can put it here, meaning that force is opposite to 28. So if that's opposite to 28, sine is defined as opposite of the hypotenuse, so you can make use of a sine function. And that is why there is 200 and multiplied with sine of 28 degrees. All are positive. Why? All forces are directed to the right. Okay, so calculated, the value is obtained as this, but you have to check because it might be wrong in the calculation. So you guys try to check the value. So positive result means the horizontal component is directed to the right.
Right.
Okay? Next, how about the vertical component of your force? The summation of forces along Y. The summation of forces along Y. Okay, so this one. So it is 250. Something 250. This one. So along Y is this force along here, but it can also be placed here, which is a force that is opposite to 14. That is why ang imong gamiton is the magnitude of the force multiplied with the sine of 14. Because that is supposed to be sine function. So sine for sine of 14. No? So 250 sine of 14. Well, here, we have what's that? 200 cosine of 28 because your force is a force that is adjacent to the given angle. Okay? So I think I'm moving faster because nakalimot ko. I was just thinking that I have no audience, no? So before I proceed, so in a interruption for clarification. Summation of forces along Y is also the vertical component of your resultant. The summation of forces along X is the horizontal component of your R. So doon na ako'y component of my resultant, Rx and Ry. Okay? So, questions before I proceed. Very similar to in finding the components of the force, right? Well, I proceed.
Yes, sir.
Then I can proceed with the magnitude of the resultant. What is the formula for the magnitude of the resultant knowing this? 2. You can apply. What can we apply here?
Pythagorean
Apply the
theorem.
Pythagorean theorem. No? So, since it should be r squared, so I have to take the square root right away on both sides to arrive at the value of r directly. And my formula would be this one. Okay? So, that's the formula. Then, just have the substitution then directly. By the way, do not round up a value here. Actually, this is being rounded up, pero that is more accurate than rounding up to 2 or 3 decimal places. No? If you want the value to be exact, now after calculating this value, you just put this in the memory of your calculator so that even the hidden digits can also be included. Okay? But, ganara mo ibutang. Anyway, we will be rounding up our final answer to 2 decimal places so you can still hit the value as expected. Okay? So, substitute, take the square, plus, you take the square, and you follow the formula. You will obtain the value of your R. So, your next problem is, what would be the direction of your force? R. Now, since ang imo ko nung Rx and Ry are all positive, na? Puros mo na positive, then that would mean R is located in what quadrant? All positive. X.
Quadrant 1.
So that is in
First
quadrant.
quadrant.
So if that's the case, if your R is here and your direction angle dire, that would mean that your theta must be acute. And if that's acute, it means that is equal to the reference angle. How to get the value of your reference angle? There's a formula. Bar theta, this is a reference angle. So R10 ratio, divide with the summation of forces along X. So you can obtain this as a result. The value of your direction angle for the resultant must be equal to the reference angle because you are in quadrant number 1. Okay, so actually, nansira na nato. We already have the magnitude. We already have the direction. But I can also present a figure like this. This is your resultant. Just approximate, no? So that is found in between. Because that's 14, that's 28, so that is 35, no? Approximately, mo na imuhang... Actually, this is your reference angle. No? The reference angle is always positive. However, your theta can be plus or minus. It's positive when it's taken in a counterclockwise direction. But if that's clockwise, your theta can be negative. Okay, so that's problem number 1. Okay, I'm waiting for any questions if there is.
If dili siya sa quadrant 1, sir.
Okay, sige na lang.
So dili siya equal to the reference
I'll
angle.
guys later in next example na lang, eh? Because I'm also preparing an example related to that. What if the location of your R is not found in quadrant 1? Okay, just to give you an idea, if it is in quadrant number 2, correct? Your reference angle can be found here. Okay? So by geometry of figure again, the sum or the angle out to the negative x-axis is 180, right? So if that is 180, imo lang ning subtract dire, and that is the angle you intend to solve. Anyway, there will be a specific example later. So later na lang ta mohatag o concrete example with that questions. Okay, so I have to proceed na lang with the next. So no problem when we are in quadrant number 1. Imo ilanan nga nakas quadrant 1
Okay, sir.
if your Rx or the summation of forces along X and summation of forces along Y will bear all positive sign. So the hanging question now is what if it is located in other quadrant? Okay, in next example maybe. Okay? So noted to nga question and I'll be answering that in detail in the following example. No more other question, no other questions so far?
None so far.
Okay, sige. So find the resultant. The same problem, but I have to present on how to apply the parallelogram law. Na? This one. This is the case when a parallelogram will be constructed. These are the forces given. Okay? So in order to form a parallelogram, na, so that your answer will also be made accurate as desired, na, then kinahanglan, you can have a good presentation of graph. Like maingon ko, this is 250 Newton. Na? Maybe we can subdivide this into how many interval? 5 equal interval. So every interval can be 50 Newton, right? So this is 250 and this is 200. So if this is 5 divisions, so this can only be 4 division. So your answer will depend, the accuracy of your answer will depend on the presentation of your graph because graphical method is only an approximate method of obtaining the value. Okay, ngayon. So you know how to construct the parallelogram. Ngayon. If this is my first force, second force I meant, to the tip of the other force, so you can draw a line or you can draw a force that's parallel to that. Okay? On the same length because it has the same magnitude of pila 200, 200. 250, so draw a line. Imula lang slide kung na kayo mga graphing instrument, no? You can slide para you can have the same line reflected there at the tip of the other. Then the diagonal, according to parallelogram law, will serve as the resultant. On the resultant. Then you can just measure on the same interval, imong gigamit scale, imong gigamit. So if you divide that into 5, so try to count how many divisions are there. So by measuring this, you can have the magnitude of your R. No, but since umaginin ako gi-graph, no, adapting an appropriate scale, no, so di na lang kumuhatag og value. Anyway, you know the value of R. Your answer may be slightly closer to the value we calculated a while ago. No, so that's your R. Okay, so then which can be obtained by just measuring. Now, whatever scale you adapted in the plotting of your forces. For the angle, so may mong gamitan. Kung approximate, pwede rin kumpas, na? Okay, so that's how, protractor ba, no? Sa mga ikag vernier sa surveying, no? Okay na lang, you can solve for the angle. No? Approximate na siya. Okay, the magnitude of R is the length of the diagonal. And its direction theta can be approximated by measuring the figure. What is the other method, graphical method of solving? Kanina. We have the sine law. No? Ano? Sine law. The law in triangles, I mean. No? It could be sine law or it could be cosine law. Okay, so this is how to apply. Law of triangles. Okay? So I'm using the parallelogram ganina constructed. And if you notice, by passing a diagonal right here, na, ang diagonal which will be constructed is a diagonal line that will start at the origin. Because there is still a shorter diagonal there, no? So dili na mo yung resultant. It should be from the origin. Okay, padong dito. Okay? So, what is included karon in my diagram is, because I have to consider the direction, correct? And the magnitude, no? Actually, you can consider either this triangle or kini. But since the angle here, may akong gusto, so ni ako sa lower part of my parallelogram. So I'm considering the lower triangle. Okay. There is a magnitude of this force which will serve as the length of the side of the triangle. This is 250, kini pila? 200. Mo man ni siya. Now, for this angle of 132, it is done by using the geometry of figure. I have 14 here, di ba? So that means it's also 14 because this line is parallel to your x-axis, right? So if that is bisected with this, our geometry shows that this is 14, so that must also be 14 from our knowledge in geometry, right? Now, how about my 28 degrees from my vertical? No, I also constructed a line that is vertical, no, or parallel to my y, which is this one. For me to show that this is 28, this is also 28. Eh? How about kine? Pila man eh? What's the value for this? Being lines intersecting perpendicular to each other. So this is 90. So if it's 90, so it would be their sum, which will serve as one of the interior angle of your triangle. No, so this is an obtuse triangle. Okay, do naman say angle which is more than 90, right? Okay, this is 132 degrees. All in all, if you take the sum. Now, what you have here is a side, correct, with non-value, an angle, correct, and another side. Now, if you have to choose between sine law and cosine law, which of the two applicable laws or the laws can be applied? Sine law or cosine law? The condition is side, angle, side. Wait,
Unsa nga side, sir, ang gi-referan?
there is a side. Magaling doon ay non-value. 250 man eh. Non-values. Di ba? So, side and angle.
Cosine law, sir.
Side. It would be side, angle, side. And that is an application. Ano po saan?
Cosine. Cosine law, sir.
Cosine law.
Adjacent man.
Wala the adjacent side because that adjacent side is good only for a right trigonometry. We are talking here with oblique triangle. So wala adjacent. So we have side, angle, side. Okay? Yes. So we have adjacent angle to two sides. Okay, na. No? Included angle is the correct term. I mean, side with two sides with one included angle. That is the appropriate term. Okay? So, the cosine law can be used, kung nakalimutan, when you have side, angle, side. And the other condition where you can also use the cosine law is side, side, side. Puro side and side, angle, side. Now, that's cosine law. So, kanalitiman eh. If the cosine law is not applicable, then it would be the other law, which is the sine law. Okay? So, dali hinumduman ang cosine law. You can use a cosine law if side, angle, side are present in the given. Or if not, all sides are known. Kana, kung nahibaw kag pila yung mga value kana, so you can use the cosine law to solve for the angle. Okay? Now, which of the part of the triangle can I solve first? Can I solve directly with R? Actually, I cannot go directly with theta because theta is not part exactly of the triangle. But I can go with beta instead because after solving for beta, maybe I can solve for the angle by just taking beta plus 40 being my theta. Correct? Okay, now, between beta and R, asa una nimong mo-solve? R or beta?
R, sir.
R? Sure?
R. R,
R,
sir.
sir.
Okay, so
Gamitan mo
give
R.
me
R.
an equation involving R applying your cosine law. Give me the equation involving R using the cosine law. What's your equation? Okay, go.
Kuan,
Nobody
sir.
is interested to answer? No one? Okay, sige. Let's proceed. So, timan isuwat nila sa imuhang atubangan. Cosine law is this one. If you want to define what is R or R squared, so it would be R squared equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides. So that is equal to 250 squared plus 200 squared. What's the next term? What is the next term? Minus what?
2 cosine.
Minus
Minus
2
250
times
times
the
200
product of this.
2
So
2
50,
cosine.
200. What's lacking? Times
times 2.
cosine of 130. This one. R squared. So equal to, these are the two sides, this one. Then minus their product, 2 times their product with the cosine of 132. Okay? There you arrive your R. Now, this R is an accurate value. Di ba? So, in our parallelogram law, there may be chances of arriving with a value which is not exactly this one. But this one, this is actually obtaining a value which is accurate, which is the same as in the analytical method. Okay, so any other questions? I have to proceed with the angle. In finding beta, how to arrive with beta? If there is already a value here, R, correct? Asa ba itong R? This one. This is a side, angle, side. Then you can define this side if you have to continue using the cosine law, right? So makasolve ka or you can arrive with an equation involving beta. But I think it would not be wise to use a cosine law when it would be easier to go with the sine law. No? So just recall your sine law to solve for beta. What is sine law? Sine law. It is a side. Okay, like this. So in sine law, diretso na siya, no? Dali-dali. Kaya bawa na siguro, mapit na mahurot atong time, no? Okay, so 200, as in 200, this one. Over the sine of the opposite angle, beta. And equal to, I have a known side of R, na? So that value, but I take note, I'm not using 411.6 because if I'm going to use this one, then I can arrive with beta, which is somewhat erroneous due to rounding up of the digit. So instead, I'm using the value which is having a lesser degree of inaccuracy. This one. This is rounded up, pero this is somewhat accurate than this one. Okay? So 411 point, then sine up, whereas the opposite angle, this one, sine of 32. Now, when this is simplified, we have a value for sine beta. That's the value. How to get this? You take the arc sine of this value, I obtain this one. And in the figure, I know that my angle theta is beta plus the 14 degrees. That's why I can have their sum, which is, again, 35.168. Okay, so that's all for today. No? So I think others even if wala sila karon dire, no? So gahuna-huna gihapunta nila ngano man ato guning gi-record para nila, no? So actually maora gini akong buhaton kung ako ning gidiretso sa OBS no akong recording, no? So I'm glad nga you're around and becoming my audience for this presentation. Okay? So any question? Because there is still remaining time left, no? Until maputol ta. Okay, this is only good for 40 minutes. So, any clarification if you like.
Sir,
Yes.
maghatag ka og answer key atong assignment sir iniguman sa
Actually,
submission sir.
because you need to work with that, arrive with the answer, so there is no answer key be given.
Ay dili ba sir kanang iniguman atong submission sir wala na matag ka sa solution ato sir dili na sir.
I have to give the answer. After all the quiz, all the sections are done and their activity number 1.
Okay, thank you sir.
Okay. Pala? One question related sa atong i-discuss kay akong putlon. Kay dugay mag-upload basta taas na kayo og time.
Send ka sa PowerPoint, ano, sir?
Asa lang? How many slides? Gine?
Send ka sa PowerPoint, ano? Sir.
Sira ako na klaro. Bungol ba lang ko lang? Ano nga ni mga gwapo bungol?
Next week, paguro na mag-send si sir sa PowerPoint.
Asa, this one?
No, sir.
Yes, sir. PowerPoint, sir.
The soft copy of this?
Yes, sir.
Ako na ibutang sa Moodle. Maybe tonight or tomorrow.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
So, na ako na i-share dito gihapon sa Moodle ako ibutang. Naman?
None so far, sir.
So, not challenging. There is still a continuation of this now. So, ato pa niyang ipadayon. So, as of now, muna niya akong i-prepare the whole morning. So,
Mag-quiz tayo ni ka Tuesday, sir.
Ha? There will be a quiz.
Mag-quiz ta.
Kasi may nasa Moodle ninyo, the quiz will be given on Monday. Right?
Ay, Monday?
Okay.
Dili Tuesday?
Yes, this is Tuesday.
Today, sir, itong schedule.
Okay, yes, correct.